Hi, welcome to Here to There, hosted by Carolyn Taketa, former attorney, current small groups pastor, and life coach. Through monthly conversations with pastors, authors, and guests, we hope to stir your thoughts and encourage you to move from where you are to where you want to be, in your personal life, in your leadership, or in your ministry.
Well, let's think for a moment about the various goals that we might have for our small groups in our ministry. We all have a vision for what we want them to experience in their small groups together, such as fellowship, Bible study, worship, life together, service, support, of course, and prayer, accountability, etc. But there's one goal that is really high theoretically when we talk about groups and envision them, but often seems to be lagging behind. And many of us would agree that that is evangelism. And this is concerning because we would all agree that we want groups to be places where people come to know Jesus and follow him. And we know that evangelism is a huge part of discipleship. But if we're going to be really honest and ask how many of our group members invite non-Christians to their groups on a regular basis and actually have their non-believers join their groups, the number would probably be quite small. So why is that? And more importantly, how can we encourage and equip our groups to engage in evangelism that is a natural part of discipleship, that's relational, that's intentional, that makes a difference for the kingdom? So to help us address these issues related to evangelism in groups, we've invited a veteran small group church consultant, Joel Comiskey. Joel, thank you so much for being on the program.
It's really good to be here. Thanks for inviting me, Carolyn. Thrilled to be here.
Well, Joel has a PhD from Fuller Seminary in Intercultural Studies focusing on small groups worldwide. And he's also founder of Joel Comiskey Group and has written, I think, like 12 or 13 books on small group space churches around the world. I peeked on your website, Joel, and I counted your books. It's a lot. You've been involved in this ministry a long time. He's also been a missionary in Ecuador and other parts of the world. And he coaches pastors and small groups ministries with his wife as well, and actively leads a life-giving small group. He has recently published a book with co-author Jim Egley called Groups That Thrive, 8 Surprising Discoveries About Life-Giving Small Groups. Okay, and this is what I actually love about your book, is that it's actually based on facts, on research. I'm kind of a research data nerd, and I love that there's actually, you've done surveys and then documented really what's going on in group life and not just what we hope is happening or we think might be happening. And so I really appreciate that about the book. And so one of the parts of the book that I found most compelling was the parts related to evangelism, which is why we wanted to invite you to come talk about that. So Joel, let's start here. You've been in ministry, particularly in small groups and cell group movement, for decades. So what have you observed or seen over the years with respect to evangelism and an evangelistic focus in groups? Do you think it was greater in the past? Is it lesser now? Or have you not noticed much of a difference? Kind of from your seat on the bus, what have you observed?
Carolyn, great question. I think that, there was probably a lot more euphoria that suddenly if you started small groups, you were going to change your city, change your church. There was probably much more of a model mode for a long time in the small group movement in the early stages, And I think now probably people are waking up to reality that it's hard work to evangelize.
Yes, we understand.
Exactly. And I would say, Carolyn, especially in the States or in Europe, more in secular societies, you really have to prioritize. You have to be proactive because it's not as easy. You don't see as much natural fruit, especially I think in individualistic cultures as well. So, yeah, I would say that's been my sense. I think in the early stages of the small group movement back in the 90s, there was much more euphoria about, hey, this is just going to work, and yet I think nowadays we've waken up to the reality that it takes some diligent planning and work to make evangelism happen.
Right. And do you notice a difference as you travel around the world on that? Like, is there still that sense of euphoria and possibility and that excitement around evangelism in groups in other parts of the world, less than maybe the United States?
Now that's kind of the second part of my question or my answer, because I really do see in other cultures, for example, Africa, Brazil, Latin America, where there's more revival, even poorer countries perhaps. But I think one aspect is more group-oriented cultures where there's revival. Then you just see a lot more evangelism, a lot more even church growth. So they're kind of on the early stages of the curve, you might say. And so, yeah, you do get a lot more evangelism in groups. And so no doubt about it, I think that as I travel around the world, there are cultures that are really doing this thing, and it's a lot easier. But, I've been in the United States for a long time now, and I do realize it's a different world. And now it's not that evangelism should change or the priority of evangelism should change. It's rather we have to be ready to not see as much fruit. And that's kind of what I wanted to talk about, is to change the motivation behind evangelism, rather than we're going to evangelize because we're going to see so much fruit. I think the motivation should be we're going to evangelize because we want to grow as disciples. Right. We want to be obedient, and we're just going to keep on doing this. God is going to give the fruit in His time, but we want to be disciples of Jesus Christ. Yeah, I think that's a much more attractive in some ways goal than just kind of a project program based, because if you link it to discipleship and our own growth, we're more likely to pursue it. So what do you think are the primary barriers or hurdles to cultivate evangelism in small groups? What are the things that make people reluctant to kind of go for it? Well, I think that some of the reasons behind that would be that if we do evangelize, perhaps we're not going to have as much intimacy. We're not going to have as much transparency in the group if we're reaching out. And that's an interesting area because, Jim and I both discovered in this research that the more outreach you have, the more a group is reaching out, the better transparency the group will have. In fact, it doubled the capacity for intimacy when a group was reaching out. So I think that's one surprise. It really is a surprise. And that actually was a big surprise because I want to read you this scenario that you open one of that chapter with, just because I've heard this exact same thing from a number of people, and I'm sure some of our listeners have as well. The resistance to adding new people, especially non-believers, into groups. So you share a story about someone named Judy, a longtime member, who told you, "I don't want new people in our group. I'm here for the fellowship. I want to be able to share deeply and not have someone new come to the group. I'm around non-believers during the week all the time, but here in the group, I want to be free to share my heart with people I know well." This type of fear, I mean, it's legitimate, right? I mean, seems like that would be, she was right, that if you do add new people, then you have to maybe stay more superficial, but your research didn't prove that. Exactly, Carolyn. It was just the opposite. Groups that are reaching out, that are trying to get non-Christians, that are trying to become friends with non-Christians, are also groups that share more intimately, that share more transparently. And so it truly was a surprise, and that should encourage small groups to reach out. Now, Carolyn, it's not like you're going to have non-Christians every week in your group. That would be great, but it's more of an attitude. We're going to be reaching out. We're going to be praying for that empty chair. If somebody comes and that is new in the group, we're going to even be more transparent. So I think it's an attitude, Carolyn, and I think it really is kind of a health factor, because groups that are reaching out tend to be healthier. That is, the people are healthier, and thus they also share more intimately. So, I'm not really sure the reason why. That was just what we discovered. Do you think the reaching out part, is it partly that they're then bonded over a common goal? Maybe that's what's fueling the intimacy? Yeah, I think that's part of it, no doubt about it. I also think, though, when there are new people in the group, for example, a new Christian, that person doesn't know the lingo, the Christianese, the these and thous. And thus, I think people are willing then to also share their own struggles, to stop getting off their high chairs or their lofty seats, and to kind of come down to reality, to remember back to where they were, and to share more intimately, and to share about their struggles in marriage, for example, or whatever, in the face of a need that's before them. So I think that's part of it. And of course, also non-Christians love it when people are real. Right.
Well, everybody loves you when people are real. Nobody wants to be in a fake group.
Yeah, no doubt about it. So I think there's a number of reasons behind it, but I think we do need to dispel the myth that you can't be transparent if you're also really reaching out and inviting non-Christians to the group.
What about the concern that you have to be on your best behavior? Because if you have a non-Christian that you don't know very well in the group, and say, Joel, you brought someone, I've never met this person, we've prayed for this person, I know stuff about them, but I don't want to mess up your witness, so I'm going to behave, be careful about what I say or what I do, because I want to make sure that they get the best possible picture of a Christian. Like, I don't know, I feel like there might be some pressure for everyone to be on their best behavior.
Yeah, that is, the common understanding, and people think that way. But I really do believe, Carolyn, that it is a myth. It really is a myth, because in reality, when there's a non-Christian, I think we should be ready to share more deeply and be more real and to express our weaknesses. Because non-Christians, that's what they're looking for. They're looking for reality, especially the next generation.
Yes.
They're looking for reality. So I think to be able to share more deeply, there's a great book out there called Small Group Evangelism by a professor at Fuller, Dr. Peace. And he talks about evangelism being a very natural process in the group. Everybody can talk and share their weaknesses. It's not something that you have to be on your best behavior. Rather, you really want to be able to share weakness. And I have found that, Carolyn, in my own experience. That when we've had people, go ahead.
I was thinking, and perhaps another hurdle is if you invite a friend from a workplace, and they come to your group, now you've intersected two worlds, and that could be a little uncomfortable for the person that's doing the inviting. Not that they're necessarily two different people, but now it's kind of like going to someone's, birthday party, and you meet here's the work people, here's the church people, here's their, relatives, and then they all kind of sometimes mesh, and sometimes you see different parts of them. And I think there's some reluctance on part of members to have their worlds collide a bit. Does that make sense?
Yeah, no, it definitely does. And that's why I encourage groups to also have kind of various types of groups. For example, one week you might have a barbecue where it'd be more acceptable for a person like that to come.
Right.
Now, whether or not that person enters into the normal attendance or I call it the discipleship of the group, coming each week, that's another level. You want to create entry points for a person like that to come, and then you just hope that they'll be there each week after that.
And then do you adapt? If they come repeatedly, would you recommend they adapt the meetings to suit the non-believer, or do they just go with business as usual with their Bible study and prayer and worship time and whatever else they do?
Yeah, I would definitely say don't adapt the meeting in the future times when that person is there, because really, I think that a person that's new is looking for God. And by the way, Carolyn, that was another aspect of the study. For example, including worship. We found that groups that include worship singing, were also more effective in outreach. And so what we discovered is that those new people, those non-Christians, they are there because they really do want to find God. So I would really encourage groups to do worship singing, to make sure the word is an important part of the group, because we don't realize oftentimes that those new people are there because they want to experience God, and we have something that they can't experience at a Starbucks or just a pure social environment.
Right.
We have Jesus.
So we need to get over our fear that somehow they're going to think it's awkward or weird or judge us, and go about our business of worshiping God together, which is why we're gathered.
Exactly. That's exactly true. And, I have the same fears, but, I am finding that the more we just allow people to experience God, the better. And that includes being real. That includes worshiping. That includes making sure the word is a part of it. But I do feel it's important to have various outreaches, other types of group. One thing we also found, Carolyn, that's interesting, and you might be coming to that, is to have fun together.
Yes.
Groups that eat together. That is an important aspect of evangelism as well. Just to have fun, to make sure that people feel like, hey, this is a community. Non-Christians are longing for that. There's such an emptiness in today's impersonal society, and they love to experience that family community sense. And so if you can eat together, have fun together, those are attractive elements.
Oh, for sure, especially with millennials, but also just, I was just reading a couple weeks ago about we're the most connected, unconnected people on the planet right now. Loneliness, anxiety, depression, all of that is an all-time high because people are so connected through social media and technology, and yet relationally they're so disconnected, and very few people have a lot of people in their lives that they could confide in. So there's a big concern about loneliness, especially as time goes on and people get more and more dependent on technology and less on face-to-face, less on actual relationships. So the idea of community, or the sense of family, as you've described it, being important and attractive to non-believers and believers alike, I think that's very appealing for people.
Yeah, no doubt about it. And another thing I might add, Carolyn, is that one aspect that's very important to the health of the group and to evangelize and multiply is community. So I don't want to downplay those regulars, really focusing on them, focusing on the community, the building up, not forcing multiplication, for example. And I've been guilty of that in the past, but rather building community, loving those who are there, making sure that you have a strong group and that, you're praying for those empty seats. But, you're depending on God to fill them. In the meantime, you're loving those who are there. You're making sure that you're going deeper, 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 while helping each one that is there move one step farther. And, that is reaching out, exercising their muscles, you might say. But for the most part, you're just going to be building community, growing together. And that's an important aspect of healthy groups.
And you talk about how important it is for each member in the group to have ownership of the group and to be empowered. Talk to us a little bit about that with respect to evangelism. If you want evangelism to flourish in our group and be a natural part of what the group is about, then who has to own that? Does the leader have to be the person owning that? Can a member own it? Do they all own it together? How do you create an environment in the group where that's a priority and everybody kind of buys in?
Yeah, no doubt about it. One statement in the research that correlated with unhealthy groups was the statement, I like to lead the entire small group meeting myself. Basically, this is a death warrant for small groups. It turns members into passive hearers, expecting them to sit in yet another meeting. So really, if there was one factor that was key, it was making sure that the people own the group. It's their group. It's not Tom's group. It's not Nancy's group. It's not Joe's group. It's our group. That really was the aspect that made healthy groups. So I would say that the word empowerment was the key aspect. If we can get our leaders, or I like to call them facilitators, to empower the group. It's their group. Getting each member to be a minister. And that means the leader becoming more of the coach. Right. Basically letting everybody do part of the meeting, the icebreaker, the worship, even leading the group, and the leader becoming more of the coach. Hey, great job, Jim, great job, Brent. And when that happens, then the group is owned by each member. It's our group. And that's a sign of health. And by the way, I dedicate the first 2 chapters to this aspect of empowerment, because it really is the key behind healthy small group ministry. And so throughout the book, I use the word facilitator, because a healthy leader should be a facilitator. And by the word facilitate is to make easy, to empower. A good leader makes it easy for everyone to talk and for everyone to minister. I like to say the leader should only talk 30% of the time, get others to talk 70% of the time.
Right. So when it comes to evangelism, if someone has a spiritual gift of evangelism, then that seems to be an obvious person who might lead the charge on that and help empower one another in that. But if you have a group where nobody really has much experience with evangelism, or they're newer believers, or they just aren't super interested? How do you stir that value in the group?
Well, I think that the facilitator will be a key in making that happen. And, everyone can pray for non-Christians.
Sure.
The group can always put out that empty chair and pray for the next person to fill. I love Carl George has always emphasized that point. And so, again, the people are doing something. They're praying. And I think the facilitator needs to say, hey, remember, God has placed people in your work. Mm-hmm. So be praying for that person. God has placed you in a neighborhood, a specific neighborhood. Remember, you're God's divine appointment there, But then I would say, Carolyn, that the facilitator needs to even go beyond that and help the group to reach out. Help the group to reach out. In my own group, we try to actually, to go out and pray for people, to find people with needs. And just now, I'll tell you, people are scared to do that. But I see that as kind of people exercising their spiritual muscles. So, again, it's more discipleship. It's not so much the fruit that takes place as a result, is rather that people are growing.
Right. So
I think when the facilitator gets that in mind, they'll understand that you just should not let your people just sit. They need to be exercising their spiritual muscles. This is part of making disciples who make disciples, and it's a part of healthy small groups. Yes, there's fears. Yes, there's resistance. But I believe that we need to make disciples who make disciples.
Yeah, and the prayer piece, is critical to that, I think. Because you're right, even if you're terrified of inviting a coworker or a neighbor, you can pray for them and let the Holy Spirit go ahead of you and do that. And I love your point earlier about creating entry points that are a little easier to invite to groups. So you suggested like a barbecue, and we're coming upon the summer season, at least in North America, where we're talking about doing stuff outside and having barbecues or pool parties or movies or something. What are some other entry points you think that are helpful? As I was thinking of this, while you think of some, I thought of one as you were speaking. I had a conversation with Steve Gladen a while back, and they do the host model, which requires you to go invite friends and start a group together, which is naturally evangelistic just by its own model. It creates that, and which is such a great idea. And one of the things he says, when you want to launch a bunch of host groups, you want to make sure your curriculum is more skills-based, life skills, more relatable on relationships, is stuff that everyone can relate to, non-believers and believers alike, rather than studying something like Exodus, for example, or something that's more dense or more heavy on the Bible that's harder to relate to. You have to explain a lot. So they try to make sure that when they do the host launches, that their curriculum and their teaching series matches something that's more digestible, easily digestible and attractive to non-believers. And I thought that was actually a really good word if you're kind of gearing strategically for the small group point leader. How do you set it up so that the facilitators and the leaders have success in this? And I think curriculum is one way we can help them. What are some other entry points or some other things that ministers can do to set up systems that will help groups engage in evangelism?
Yeah, by the way, I love what Steve Gladen is doing there, and that is a great technique, as it were, to use. Another thing is to make it a goal, for example, that each group has 2 outreach events per year. And so the group is planning, for example, it might be a barbecue, it might be going to a movie together, going to a game together, it might be playing bingo. It could be silly things, but just, a dinner, for example, within the home would be a good one. So I think just holding the leaders accountable for, let's say, 2 outreaches per year, and then finding out what happened. I think another great way is rotating the group. My small group, one of the rotations is in a restaurant, and oftentimes that's a good place to invite non-Christians. So rotation's a great thing to get new people in the group. Oftentimes a host person will have more success in inviting a friend into their home
True.
than that friend going to another home. So there are various things a group could do, but I think, Carolyn, it's more of a mindset. If the facilitator realizes that this is growing the people, this is helping those people become disciples, it's more of the why of small group ministry. I love that book, Start with the Why. And when we understand that evangelism is really that why of growing as disciples, I think a facilitator will pray that through and help the people to be reaching out.
Yeah, the whole why part, what that does too, and you bring it out as well in Thrive, is it takes so many touches. I forget how many you said for people to come to faith in Christ. And it's not just, maybe somebody is one and done. Maybe if you're Billy Graham, it's one and done. And you come to Christ right there on the spot. But for most people, it's multiple people that have touched them throughout their lives and shared something about Jesus with them. And so if we see our groups and our members and ourselves as part of that journey for people, then we don't have to be as focused on the fruit, so to speak, and rather focus on how is this helping our group move forward and become more like Jesus together.
Yeah, Carolyn, I really want to stress that point, because when we focus more on the technique, okay, do this and you're going to win so many people, people kind of feel like, oh, I know that's not going to happen. That's not part of my reality. But when the focus is on you are going to be growing. You're a disciple of Jesus Christ. Let's do this together. Let's be disciples of Jesus. The fruit will come in God's time, but we're going to be growing together. And, according to our study, the group will be healthier too as we do that. Well, then it's a whole different motivation, and God will give the fruit in His time.
Right.
In my own group, we prayed for a long time for 2 empty chairs, and we thought we'd see fruit immediately. We did not. We really did not. But we kept at it because of this why factor. And then suddenly, a long time later, people begin to come. So, we can't force this thing, especially in secular cultures. But we need to realize that God is molding us and shaping us as disciples of Christ. And groups that reach out are healthier groups, according to the study that Jim and I did.
Right, and it is sweet when God does answer those prayers and you hang with people for a long time and they do come to Christ. I remember a baptism not long ago where the whole group was up there baptizing with a spouse who was a non-believer, but the wife had been part of the group for years, and he'd been kind of on the fringes, come to social stuff, but not the Bible study. He'd kind of been checking out on and off, rarely attended church, and over time they just continued to include him and love him. And his family, and eventually he came to faith, and it was just such a sweet moment to see the whole group up there because they all had a piece in God using them, and that for sure made the group much healthier and much more excited, and knit them together as a community. And that kind of fruit over time just helps us in our discipleship altogether.
I love what you're saying there. Yeah, when God brings the fruit, what a wonderful thing. And, He does answer prayer. God does answer prayer. He wants us to reach out. I mean, God is more interested in people getting saved and discipled than we are. But what a privilege to be part of the process.
Yes. Well, thank you so much, Joel, for your time. I love that. That's a great final word. God is more interested in people coming to faith than we are. We do well to remember that and realize we're not controlling this. The Spirit is. So are there any final thoughts, Joel, you'd like to share before we sign off?
Well, I just think the final thought is really what I just said, is that God is more interested in making disciples than we are. We have the privilege of being part of this process. Just to remember that, healthy groups are groups that make an effort to reach out. God needs to give the results. And so press on, and God is going to do this thing.
No, thank you so much for the encouragement. Thank you, Joel, for being on the program.
Hey, thank you for inviting me. It's been a great privilege.
Wow. Well, you can follow Joel on his social media. His primary contact is his website, Joel Comiskey, COMISKEY group.com. You can buy Groups That Thrive on Amazon or anywhere else. Actually, he gives away a whole bunch of free chapters on his website, so you can take advantage of that as well. It's a great book for us point leaders. And you can also interact with Joel on our Facebook Small Group Network page. He is a friend of the network, and he'll respond on there as well. So thank you, Joel. God bless you and your ministry. And thank you all for listening to Group Talk. See you next time.
Thank you for listening to Here to There, part of the Group Talk network of podcasts. If you like what you've heard, make sure you subscribe on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you get your favorite podcasts. If you want to learn more, make sure you check out smallgroupnetwork.com for more resources.